Hi everyone, and welcome to this mini lecture on what is mass culture theory. This mini lecture is part of a series that is part of a course called Popular Culture in the U.S., which is a course taught at North Shore Community College. In this mini lecture, we're going to take a look at this idea of mass culture theory, which is largely understood as the earliest theoretical approach to talking about popular culture. And so this first one, we're going to explore what it is, but then we'll have a few follow-up mini lectures on mass culture theory, talking about problems, looking at examples, etc. So when we look at mass culture theory, our origin for this largely comes from a guy named Matthew Arnold, who wrote a book that was basically a collection of essays called Culture and Anarchy in 1869. If you're ever interested, this is actually a book you can get online and take a look at what some of his arguments are. I'll tell you right now, these are not lively and engaging texts, but it's worth taking a look at. So in this, what we see is kind of the cornerstone of much of popular culture critique, and it's a critique that still is around today, and we hear it all the time. And within mass culture theory, we get this discussion of culture as taste, and that there is a variety of tastes, but the tastes are hierarchical. There are some tastes that are better than others. And the best taste of all, we could say, is the elite culture. And so historically, what you see happening is people privileging elite culture as the best taste, as what is good taste. And that creates a hierarchy of, well, what are not so good tastes? And the goal within this, or the approach here, is to privilege that elite culture. Say, this is what everybody should be aspiring for. This is what everybody should appreciate or see as fine. And within that, a subtler critique of saying not everybody can appreciate it. Not everybody can, fully appreciate elite culture, elite art, because they're not smart enough, they're not good enough, they are wasting their time on other things. So be aware of this. Like I said, this is something that's ever present in modern culture. When people start to rag on reality television, or they start to attack video games, there's an element of mass culture theory at work there. It's often saying that culture is not good, it's not a museum. So what ends up happening with mass culture theory is that there's embedded in it is this idea of something that is mass produced has less value. If you can make a lot of it, then it's not worth as much. And again, we see this lots of times when there's, this is part of an economic concept of supply and demand. If you have a lot of something, it's potentially less valuable than if you have a small amount of something, right? This is why gold is supposedly worth so much, is because it is not abundantly available, whereas plastic is abundantly available, so therefore it's less valuable. And that mass production comes with two things create mass production. Ease of reproduction, right? How easy is it to reproduce something? Within popular culture, or within culture, that question rises up, how easy is it to reproduce? So what we see is some things are given more privilege than others. Certain types of art, right? Painting is considered more valuable than taking photos, because painting is not easy to reproduce, at least if you're looking at paintings that are hand-painted. Whereas photos, well, yeah, certainly if you have the original film, you can make a lot of reproductions of it. And then the cheapness of reproduction. So it's not just can it be reproduced, but can it be reproduced cheaply? And so things that can be reproduced cheaply often become less valuable. Certainly film has had this long legacy. Film at this point, there is an argument that it has definitely made its way into elite culture, but there's still a sense of it, even within that though, people see most films as being mass culture, right? Easy to reproduce and cheap to reproduce, especially now with digital, where they don't even have to reproduce the film, the actual, physical film itself anymore. All they have to do is send the digital file to different places to go onto the projector. So it becomes increasingly cheap. And there's a devaluing in that we see within cultural dialogue. So within mass culture, what you see, or within mass culture theory, what you see is there's this idea that authentic cultural products should have the following. They should be singularly produced, right? So typically there should be a singular artist connected to it, or of some, an artist, musician, some kind of creator who is making these things one at a time. And it should take time. Right? It shouldn't just, hey, 3 seconds and done, but it needs to take time, as opposed to the mass reproduction where, in an hour you could have 100 books reproduced. In an hour you could have all sorts of, things remade or mass produced. It should require direct human effort. Now, sometimes this gets a little complicated, of course, in the current age. But you definitely, the idea is that some specific person is actually working on this project. It's not just something you can automate, right? So if it's, one of the ideas here is if a robot can do it, you don't have to. So these productions also require intellect to experience. So you can't just have an intellect to create it, but you need to have intelligence in order to experience this. And this is again, this goes into this, into this idea of elite culture, that not everybody will have the capabilities to fully appreciate it. And we see this again if you go into into museums, if you go into the theater, that there's this expectation of you need to be of a certain intelligence in order to fully appreciate a certain experience. So the power of experience is given to a certain population, and others are denied in a sense that they can't fully experience it because they're not intelligent enough. We'll see within this mass culture theory a lot of critique of the masses and their lack of intelligence, and again, there's lots of questions about that. The products should be they should contain culturally ordained aesthetics. Now that's a very complicated term, and what it really means is taste. Whatever the product is, it should embody the taste of elite culture at that particular time and place. So examples I have up here is the Mona Lisa and the Sydney Opera House, and both of these embody certain elements of taste of the cultures that produce them. However, mass cultural products, or anything that is considered a mass cultural product, is manufactured in large numbers, right? So the idea is that this comes off some kind of conveyor belt. Produced quickly, and by produced quickly, we quickly is relative, but here we're talking about, in relation to how singular pieces are made, which can sometimes take years. These things are often made in much quicker time. We're talking, it may be days, weeks, or months, but it's still significantly quicker than what we may see with authentic cultural products. Require a passive audience. Now, I have disagreement with this in that I don't think mass cultural products require a passive audience. I think there's a very active audience a lot of times. But what this means, or the assumption here is that the audience members just sit back and are fed. They're fed the movie, they are fed the pictures, they are fed the sounds, and they don't have to work to understand it. Like I said, personally, there's problems with this, and we'll take a look at it when we get to the critiques of mass culture theory, but this is an assumption of mass culture theory. And contain no meaningful worth. They're superficial. Right? And so the idea is that people cannot get any deeper truths about life and the world, and therefore they are again considered, they're superficial, they're lacking taste, they're lacking substance. All right. So again, mass culture theory, where it comes from is this idea that in the 17 and 1800s with the Industrial Revolution, we see this mass urbanization and mass industrialization occurring. That is, these two forces, ginormous cities and lots of things being produced, really disrupted the good qualities of society. And really what you hear within mass culture theory is that back then people knew their place. And when you get into urbanization, new places emerge, new roles emerge. It's a very different world for men and women to be living in villages or living in farm areas to be living in cities. You go from, access to the other sex could be miles away to it being right down the block. And what that means for relationships, what that means for how and what people do, what that means for people's opportunities significantly changes. Your opportunities in a city are significantly more than your opportunities in a village. But that scares people. That makes the elite concerned because the masses are supposed to know their place. We also see, there's also this argument that within this development of urbanization and industrialization, individuals lack moral substance and communal connections. Being in the city means that they're going to go wild, right? And we have all of this mythology about how if you go to the city, you're going to be corrupted, you're going to do sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And this is that concern that all of a sudden, without being exposed to these mass productions, being exposed to this throwaway culture, thus makes people more immoral or makes society more disruptive. Again, we'll talk about this later, but this is largely false, and we've seen that actually proven over the last 200 years. We've become more moral. We've become more stable as a society. And the idea is that once this starts to happen, without that traditional society that we see in the 1700s and 1600s, one that's rural-based, not city-based, society falls apart. And that individuals in a mass society, and the concern here is that the individuals in a mass society are pawns to mass media and popular culture. That is, because they're not intelligent to know the difference between elite culture and popular culture, they become subject and easily manipulable or more likely to commit and do horrible things. They're lacking morals, they're lacking intelligence. The world is going to fall apart because of popular culture or mass culture. So we can kind of understand why Matthew Arnold called his book Culture, and there he meant elite culture in anarchy. Without elite culture, if we're left with mass culture, anarchy ensues. So what happens is that democracy and education may actually be bad for society. What we see in the 1800s is mass democratic practices established throughout the world. And with that, we also see the increase of education. However, this is mass-produced education. This is putting 30, 40, 50, 60 kids in a classroom and teaching them. It's not a tutor. So again, mass production of education starts to raise a question of, can these people really be taught? Now, when I'm saying this, me personally, I don't believe this, but this is part of what mass culture theory promulgates. It's part of what its approach is. So ultimately, the breakdown of class, status, education, and rights means that the elite class has less control over the many, and that's disconcerting. That's, certainly breaking with the tradition of thousands of years. And so, mass culture theory is really a theory of elite culture trying to, avoid or feeling challenged by people that have more means and rights than they ever did before. And again, we still see this today. All right, that's all for now. Thank you very much for listening. I will see you in the next lecture.